In the frontier days of the American West, the chuck wagon was a mobile kitchen. In my Agile chuck wagon, I have the Agile, the Lean, the leadership, the programming techniques you need to bring your bland software implementation to life. You bring the project, I'll bring the fire. Let's get cooking. Hey there, Chuck here. Do you have comments or feedback about the episodes that you're hearing on the Agile Chuck Wagon? Do you have some ideas for new episodes? Subscribers to the podcast have access to a forum where they can provide that feedback directly, but I still welcome your questions and comments through the channels that are listed at the end of the podcast. Please consider letting me know what you think so that you can help me develop future episodes of the Agile Chuck Wagon. And now, back to the show. Hello, today on the Agile Chuck Wagon, we are mining my bullet journal for more topics. Today, we're talking about Zig Ziglar's Wheel of Life. For those of you who aren't familiar with Zig Ziglar, he was a salesman in the 20th century. He reached his peak of fame during the 1960s and 1970s and ended up becoming a motivational speaker. He had this metaphor of a wheel of life that had 7 spokes, and each one of these spokes is a core area of your life. And in order to achieve this feeling of success, that a person needed to be successful in each one of these 7 areas. I'm going to stop there and talk about a modification that I did that I use as a retrospective technique because I found that a 7-sided wheel was difficult to draw. So instead, I draw an octagon, and each one of these sides is a facet of my core areas of life. I then am able to draw a radar chart where I compare where I was at the beginning of the retrospective period to where I am now, and I also can draw areas where I think I want to grow. For those of you who aren't familiar with radar charts, I'm sure you've seen them in the past. They look a little bit like spider webs, where you might have concentric rings, and then depending on how the magnitude of some area of this axis, it's either larger or smaller. It's a way of comparing the balance of data. And since Zig Ziglar measured success in terms of balance in these areas, you could imagine that if you're doing well in your life, that this radar chart that I'm describing would be fairly even across all 8 areas. Those 8 areas are, starting from the 9 o'clock position on an analog clock, mind/intellect. This is where I record things like learning and growth. The next one is physical or health. This is where I record exercise and activities like that. The next one is personal. This is where I record things like fun and enrichment activities. The next quadrant, the 4th one, is social. This is where I talk about friends and community. Now we're at the 3 o'clock position. The next one is work and career. Then comes family. Now we're at the 6 o'clock position. Spiritual. Not all of you are spiritual people. You know that I am a man of faith, but this is where I look at activities where I'm knowing myself or getting more attuned to who I am. And the final category, bringing us back to 9 o'clock, is financial. By the way, Zig Ziglar combined those personal and social areas into a single one that he called personal. And so I find this to be a powerful personal retrospective technique to make sure that I am taking a well-balanced view of my life to see where there are areas that I am focusing perhaps more of my effort and areas where I'm focusing less effort. At this point, things like mind and intellect are shadowing physical and health. Work and career are heavily weighted, whereas perhaps friends and community, my social sector, is less weighted. I think of this retrospective activity as a kind of tune-up. Zig Ziglar was a religious person, and he would say, which one of those 7 areas, remember he has 7 instead of 8, he would say, which one of those 7 areas did God create you not to be successful in? Obviously, the answer is all 7. And he would point out, did you know that improving your level of success in each one of these areas is a choice that you make? So as I take a look at this wheel and I see that my social scores are low and my physical and health levels are very low, I remind myself that I have a choice, that I can spend more time, more effort in those areas, and I can look at the rest of the wheel to figure out how to balance it. Maybe I need to not work 60 hours a week. Maybe I need to make sure that instead of reading books, maybe I'm doing it while I'm on the treadmill. I can figure out creative ways in order to incorporate these areas where I'm weaker with areas that I'm stronger. And that's the point of today's podcast and talking about Zig Ziglar's Wheel of Life. In case you missed it, the 8 areas that I use during my retrospective are mind/intellect, physical/health, personal, social, work and career, family, spiritual, and financial. I hope that getting an introduction to Zig Ziglar's Wheel of Life has got your creative juices flowing. If you decide to try a retrospective like this, maybe look over the past quarter or the past year, whatever time frame makes sense to you. I'd love to hear what kind of results that you came up with and whether you found it to be a useful tool. Until I hear from you, or until next week, I wish you success in your Agile endeavors. It's time to pack up the Agile Chuck Wagon for now. The Agile Chuck Wagon podcast is written, directed, and produced by Chuck Durfee. Chuck is a software development manager and Agile coach in the Denver area. Thanks to Audionautics.com and freesound.org for the backing music and sound effects. You can reach this podcast on Twitter at AgileChuckWagon or by email at chuck@agilechuckwagon.com for comments and episode suggestions. Please also visit our Patreon page to support this podcast and learn about membership benefits. Thank you very much for listening.